Okay, in this video we're going to look at measurements and the units and what approximate size we'd use particular units for. We use what we call the metric system, our old system of measurement, which sometimes you'll hear is called the imperial system. You've probably heard of feet and inches that height is often measured in, but it's a system that is getting older and going more out of use, mainly because a lot of other parts of the world use the metric system. Now, the reason why the metric system is used more is because it counts in tens. For instance, there are 10 millimeters to a centimeter, and it makes sense to use this because our number system counts in tens from 0 up to 9. Now, in the imperial system, feet per inches, a foot per inch is made up of 12 inches, and we don't count in 12s, so it makes it more difficult. So we're slowly going over to the metric system, and it's the metric system that you have to know for your exam. So let's have a look at length first. Well, say for instance we've got a fingernail that we've bitten off and we want to measure the length of it. We'd probably use millimeters. Millimeters are the smallest form of measurement that we do in, I suppose, the everyday life. There are smaller ones that we'd use in science, but if you've got a measuring tape with centimeters on it, then the tiniest marks usually represent the millimeters. If we got 10 millimeters, then we've got a centimeter. Centimeters are used for a lot for different things. You could use it to measure the page of a book, say 20 centimeters, 30 centimeters, and so on, or maybe the width of a shelf. Where if we used millimeters, there'd just be too many millimeters and we'd be dealing with numbers that are too big. And then we go on to using meters. For instance, if I was measuring the height of a person and I was saying, oh, they're 123 centimeters, so this person is 105 and this person is 100, it starts to get all complicated. Whereas if I can say one person is 1.2 meters, whereas the other one is 1.3, it makes it a nice, easier way of reading things. So things like meters often may be used for height, possibly could use centimeters for that, but then things like measuring a room or the length of a swimming pool, we definitely have to use meters, and there are 100 centimeters for every meter. A little thing to note here, milli means a thousandth. Think of the millennium as 1,000 years, and there are, if you look, 1,000 millimeters to a meter. 10 times 100 is 1,000. Similarly, cent means 100, and hence there are 100 centimeters to a meter. So there's two little things you can remember to help with remembering your units. The last measurement we do in length then is the kilometer, often used for distance. In this country we do use miles a lot. In other parts of Europe they talk in kilometers per hour in speed. We use miles per hour. But kilometers are used a lot, and there are 1,000 meters to a kilometer. Kilo means 1,000. So in relation to roads and distances, kilometers are what will be used. Mass then. Mass is the proper name for what we'd usually count as weight. The smallest measurement of mass is a milligram. Say for instance I had a teaspoonful of salt or sugar, I'd measure in milligrams. Going up for that then, if I had 10 milligrams, I'd have a gram, and grams are often used in recipes when we're weighing out butter or flour. A certain amount of grams would be needed. And then finally, notice how there's no sort of like cent measurement here. It just simply goes from grams to kilograms. Kilograms are used in a form of weight. The old system, which is gradually going out of use, is stone. That's the imperial system. Now it's slowly being replaced by kilograms. And people, the weight of a table, the weight of an animal, all would be measured in kilograms. And remember, because of that kilo is 1,000, there are 1,000 grams to a kilogram. On to capacity. Capacity is often mixed up with volume, but in relation to measuring capacity, we've got milliliters. So a cup would have a certain amount of milliliters in it. if we've got 1,000 millilitres, we've got a litre, and litres are used to measure more bigger amounts of fluid, tanks and so on. So for instance, in my when I'm measuring petrol into my car, it's usually measured in litres. Our last type of measurement that we have to look at then is volume. Now volume uses a cubic system. When you eventually look at the volume of a cube in geometry, we work out the volume of a cube by multiplying its sides by each other. So for instance, if I had a cube that was 1 millimeter wide, its height would be 1 millimeter and its length would be 1 millimeter. And so it's 1 times 1 times 1, the volume of the cube is 1. So that would be a cubic meter. And the volume of, say, a cup would be measured in cubic millimeters. From there, and there's a mistake by here, I'm afraid it should read 10 times 1,000. Up a stage we've got a cubic centimeter. Now the reason why it should read up 1,000 times 1,000 is that, if you remember, we've got 10 millimeters to a centimeter. So if I had 10 millimeters by 10 millimeters by 10 millimeters, that would be 1 cubic centimeter. But then we'd have 10 times 10 times 10 cubic millimeters. So there are actually 1,000 cubic millimeters to a centimeter. So a millimeter, 1 by 1 by 1 millimeters, hence 1 cubic millimeter. But because there's 10 millimeters to a centimeter, when I'm converting cubic millimeters into cubic centimeters, I've got to think, right, 10 millimeters by 10 millimeters by 10 millimeters. 10 times 10 times 10 is 1,000. There's 1,000 cubic millimeters to a cubic centimeter. When I take it up another stage then, I'm going to go from cubic centimeters to cubic meters. And again, the measurement is wrong on the side. I do apologize. Because there are 100 centimeters to a meter, it should be 100 by 100 by 100. And 100 times 100 times 100 is 1,000,000. So there are actually 1,000,000 cubic centimeters to a cubic meter. And we'd measure things like the pools in cubic meters. So a cubic millimeter to a cubic centimeter, there are 1,000 cubic millimeters to a cubic centimeter. And cubic centimeters to cubic meters, there are 1,000,000 cubic centimeters to a cubic meter.